Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Pathways to Excellence. I am tremendously honored to have with me right here Mr. Jarrod Sio, an Assistant Director of the Sarawak State Education Department. Perhaps we do not know, but maybe, and perhaps the person responsible for this right here. Am I speaking to the man at the moment? The man who is responsible for this?
I am partly responsible, but not fully responsible for this.
All
So
right. Well, thank you so much for taking the opportunity to speak with me. Jarrod, you are a person with a tremendously inspiring story, and it's an honor to speak with you. Ladies and gentlemen, for context, the reason that I knew of Jarrod in the very first place was because I saw a random post of his on LinkedIn, and essentially that post talks about how essentially a young boy who was once a school teacher in Sarawak and also bears many other parts of history alongside, dropped out of a program in engineering and eventually became a Cambridge graduate. Jarrod, you've had an incredible journey so far from well essentially dropping out to heading to the home of Tunku Abdul Rahman and also Lee Kuan Yew. So like congratulations. And
thank you.
how did such a miraculous journey come about?
All right, thank you, Victor, and thank you for having me. So, in answer to your question, let me begin not right at the beginning, but where you mentioned, which
Mm,
was when I dropped out. So, when I was about 18, I pursued a diploma in electrical and electronics engineering, which really wasn't my cup of tea.
mm,
Uh, it was a diploma program, and not long after joining, I dropped out because I simply wasn't good at many of the elements and components of engineering. And it
mm,
was not due to lack of trying, though. I had tutors
mm,
uh, amongst friends, among peers. I mean, you have peer tutors. Um, but it simply wasn't for me. But before that, before dropping out of the engineering program, I was actually denied a place in Form 6, sixth form. So these two failures um, helped to, I suppose, redirected me towards teacher training. So I
mm,
became a teacher. I was posted to um, a rural school for over 6 years
mm.
before I went to the district level and now at state level. So how did I go to Cambridge? That is a slightly longer story, but let me just keep it brief. While I was appointed as after I was appointed as an officer in Selangor. It sounds like Selangor, but it's in Selangor in Sarawak,
Mm,
which was a small district. I became the English language officer there in the
mm,
in the education office. So while I was an officer there, I started earning a master's in educational management,
mm,
which followed which was followed swiftly by a PhD. So after I
mm.
finished the PhD, I decided to present my findings in Oxford
Mm,
University. So little did I expect to fall in love with Oxford.
mm.
Um, I mean, you've been to Chicago U. You know about the Gothic architecture.
Ah, yes, of
You
course. Mm,
the ivies and the
mm,
you know beyond the architecture, just simply the dreaming spires. So
mm,
so I decided to apply for uh, Cambridge, a master's though this time because I've never studied abroad. So
mm.
from preschool all the way to PhD, I have always studied locally, all the way to
Ah.
PhD.
Mhm.
So Cambridge, I think it stemmed from that admiration for that spirit, the intellectual spirit and fervor in Oxford.
Mm.
So Oxbridge, I think they are more similar than not. So I went to Cambridge because it had the course that I wanted, which
Mm.
Oxford did not offer. Oxford has an MSc in education,
Ah.
but almost nothing with regards to leadership, which was what I wanted. So that's how I went to the school of not only Lee Kuan Yew and Tunku Abdul Rahman, but also Tun H.S. Lee, the first finance minister, among others. Yeah.
Okay, wow. Thank you so much for that. Okay then. Now, if I could maybe dial back a little bit right here. So then, well, are you originally from Kuching, Sarawak as well? Like, are you originally from Sarawak?
I am. I'm Sarawak bred and born. I was born in Cebu. It
Wow.
is, yeah. So it is about a 6 hours drive from Kuching. So it is a
Ah,
fairly small place.
wow. Okay. Fascinating. And then when we think really about how you essentially transition over from, well, that initial failure, right? So, like, I
Yeah.
always find it especially fascinating to think about how people, right, who are in high positions, of course, like your distinguished self right here, people who are in high positions or who have faced essentially like great successes in various ways right there, very often they conceal a bit of vulnerability or essentially certain past failures that had come about right here. Now, of course, everybody has a story like that, but I'm interested in understanding how did you transition from those failures to a point of being able to succeed well enough that you were able to essentially go off to Cambridge?
I think it is very important. It is vital. It is essential for people to list not only an inventory of achievements, but also their failures. I think it is essential
Mm-hmm.
because when I was doing the and failing the engineering course, I have
Mm-hmm.
never felt more alone. I
Mm-hmm.
have that was when I developed anxiety. Well,
Mm-hmm.
that was when I developed an overwhelming sense of loneliness
Mm-hmm.
and simply helplessness. I seek help and I seek tutoring and so forth, but nothing helped. So it made me more empathetic. It made me more, until now, more compassionate for people who are struggling and
Mm-hmm.
who, not for a lack of effort, but perhaps um, external forces. External forces could be an abusive family, or it
Mm-hmm.
could be a bad decision. It could be a friendship gone sour. It could be a whole host and coterie of things. So it makes me more compassionate. So I think it is vital for us to list out failures. And
Mm-hmm.
I think I am optimistic by nature, and that has helped. And this achievement um, actually is iterative. I think it is significant to point this out because I did not intend or nor have I planned to
Mm-hmm.
complete a postgraduate degree, much
Mm-hmm.
less a PhD, and even less so Cambridge.
Mm-hmm.
Ask me about Cambridge 5 years ago. It was not on my
Mm-hmm.
list. It was not on a bucket list, my bucket list at all.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, not at all. And I think it was iterative in the sense that okay, as a government servant,
Mm-hmm.
uh, we are always encouraged to pursue higher education. There are always leeways and opportunities for government servants, especially in the field of education, to pursue higher education, whether it be
Mm-hmm.
fully online or, in my case, I went to UPSI, University Pendidikan Sultan Idris in
Mm-hmm.
Tanjung Malim, Ipoh. Uh, UPSI's master's program was interesting. It was possibly the only program,
Mm-hmm.
master's program, where the lecturers actually flew in. They
Wow.
flew to Cebu, they flew to Kuching, they flew to Sabah. And mine was the first batch. And
Mm-hmm.
it was highly unusual because they were they were not making profits at all. They
Wow.
were operating at a loss.
Wow.
they,
Well,
they admitted they admitted
well,
as much. They admitted as
I
that was
see.
really quite strange. But I had my doubts because I was simply wasn't really interested at first. But I showed up and I finished the thing. And once you have finished a master, I think it's not an extremely huge leap to consider a PhD. And that's how I got onto the PhD, not bandwagon, but
Mm.
I thought, why not? Prior to finishing the masters, I had no idea, nor did I have any plans, as I've mentioned earlier, Victor,
Mm.
about a doctorate. No plans at all. In fact, I spent most of my 20s in bands in KL. I was a freelance journalist. I wrote for magazines,
Mm.
and that I thought was my life. Yeah,
And things changed along the way. Wow,
it was
fascinating.
it was iterative. So this whole
Mm.
meandering, long-winded story, I apologize for this,
No
is
problem.
me illustrating that things can be iterative
Mm.
and unpredictable, especially at 19, 18, 19, how we can make plans. Uh,
Mm.
yeah, and when I was at Cambridge, I hung out with a lot of undergrads, and these people seem to have to have gotten straight A's straight out of preschool or the moment they were born. I don't know. Yeah,
It's like the moment
seriously.
you were born, then you start writing an exam. Oh, then your parents are like, oh, that's correct, darling. Then the next thing you know, then boom, like pass Cambridge interview.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, I did, it was probably the same at Chicago Uni, right? But I met people who came from a long line of Oxbridge graduates. Oh,
Mm.
my grandfather went to Queens and my father went to King. And I was like, oh, that's very nice.
Wow, it's like a generational thing, right there. But
Yeah.
let's also dial back a little bit.
Okay.
Now, when confronting really, say a situation that causes us maybe in the dark night of our soul to have to reevaluate certain things, right? A
Mm.
person may then, well, have different paths in front of them. But of the different paths that you had available to you, why English language teaching? Why did that seem appealing to you? And how did it later, well, I guess, factor into your decisions?
Because uh, of all the things that I could have done, one of the things that I considered was journalism.
Mm,
As my parents pointed out to me, there's no money in that.
mm,
I mean, there's not much money in teaching as well, but at least it's a stable thing. So that's how I went from a failure in engineering. And so
mm,
once I went to the Teachers Training College in KL, which actually twins with University of Malaya. I had no idea at the time. But
mm,
so um, in teaching of English in the second language, I actually started to excel at it
mm,
because it has always been a particular strength of mine. Yes, this is not tooting my own horn. I'm just speaking from a perspective of someone who has failed incredibly in other respects, in other metrics, in maths, in engineering maths,
mm,
which
mm,
I had to take twice, and all of
mm,
that. And so there was this particular subject that I was okay,
mm,
and that was how I became a teacher. I was posted right after that, and
mm.
my life changed. That life trajectory, it changed.
Wow, I can imagine.
Yes.
And when you speak really of kind of like iterative changes, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if we were to basically, well, plot on the y-axis, basically like the trajectory right there, and basically on the x-axis, then you have time. So you might imagine that maybe like the iterative change might be something like
Yes.
this, like that, like this, like that. But I'm guessing that Cambridge was like a something of
It
that nature.
was. It was. It was. I think, to be fair, I went to Cambridge for reasons beyond academics. I mean, I already have a doctorate, right?
Mhm.
And I simply, it was partly due to the pandemic as well. The
Mm,
pandemic, if there's anything that the pandemic taught me, was how short life is.
mm,
So, and I actually took uh, no pay leave, which is shocking to my colleagues. Even today, you can
mm.
see their jaws drop into the floor. I mean, uh, I'm not sure if you work for the government, but if you are, then you know taking a no pay leave is a big no, especially for your career, especially when you take a year out like I did. So it was a decision that was not made easily, but no regrets. It was a sacrifice for sure. It
I
was a
see.
sacrifice for sure. Yes,
I
and in
see.
terms of promotional track, I am now behind by a year compared to my friends and cohorts and other
Mm-hmm.
officers. But I think it was a road that had to be taken for myself,
Mm-hmm.
and because of, I mean, if I did not go to Cambridge after receiving an offer of place, it will haunt me. That is for sure. And I would take that 1 year. I would, given the chance to redo it, I would do it again.
I
I would
see.
make that same decision. But of course, you were right. When I took the master's and doctorate locally, it was a matter of course.
Mm.
And when I went to Cambridge, it was a whole different ballgame. It
Wow.
it was meeting with people who had probably never known failure, and it was eye opening when I socialized. I optimized my time there, Victor. Seriously, I attended as many formals as I could, and I and for the audience out there who may not be aware of how Oxbridge, I mean, who may be mystified by
Mm-hmm.
Oxbridge traditions, there's this thing called formal
Mm-hmm.
dinners where you wear gowns and you
Mm-hmm.
attend a three-course dinner,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to be invited to the colleges. You cannot just mosey in. And yeah, and so what I did was I called WhatsApp message anybody I knew in in the WhatsApp group, whether that be Malaysian SOC or whatever SOC, Singapore SOC, and I got invited to almost all the colleges. So out of the 31 colleges, I managed to get to 27 colleges.
Wow.
Yeah, they have something called the Formers Challenge where you complete the whole thing in a year. But I didn't manage to complete everything, but I managed to go to some colleges multiple times.
I
So
see.
I guess that counts. So I socialized massively. I enjoy the conversations, much like the conversation that I'm having with you right now, Peter.
Wow, wonderful. Okay. And thank you so much for that tremendously meaningful sharing. Incidentally, I should say also that my computer rarely fails. However, it failed on one very specific occasion when I was browsing your LinkedIn to basically look at all of your different posts right here. Basically, there were many, many posts about Cambridge right here to the point that after a while the computer was like, "Oh, nope, I'm sorry." And so yeah, like, well, on balance, I guess, well, you've had plenty of these social experiences and you saw had a lens indeed to maybe a world that was very different of like highly status conscious individuals, of course, but you know, kind of as someone who has managed to essentially achieve something from that world, right? Essentially, well, a degree from Cambridge, essentially, you walk in the same legacy of Isaac Newton, Tunku Abdul Rahman, Lee Kuan Yew, and various other things of that nature. And so you also mentioned this idea of, well, what I would call amor fati, that if you were to repeat essentially your life, that you would do this thing over and over again. And so now, as you kind of like take an account really of what you did then, what would you say is the biggest thing that you took away from this transformative experience?
Well, I'm glad you pointed out Amor Fati, and is it Nietzsche
Nietzsche,
who,
yeah.
yeah. Anyway, so the biggest takeaway from my Cambridge experience really is that one has to be broad-minded when it comes to experiences. The variety and diversity of background of there are many roads leading to Rome, to
Mm,
and and I think many of my Cambridge friends has only known one, and it and I don't think I should be surprised to learn that they too felt uncertain about their own futures.
mm-hmm,
Um, I actually allow me to give an example. I have a friend who went to Harvard for her undergrad, went to Oxford for her first master's, and then came to Cambridge for her second master's. And after graduation, she hasn't done anything much. She seemed to have a paralysis from analysis, and because of all this social status consciousness, and because if she wants to make moves, what's next, right? It has to be McKinsey, has to be United Nations, it has to be entrepreneurship, it has to be finance, hedge fund, all these things that would tick all the boxes of an insecure high achiever. And this term, insecure high achiever, did not come from me. It came from this book called When McKinsey Came to Town. So when McKinsey Came to Town, it's a book that I would highly recommend to anyone who would like to have an insight into the the mindset of so many of these high achievers. It does not specifically talk about high achievers per se, but there was one particular chapter where a human resource officer from McKinsey, New York, actually revealed the sort of candidates they were looking for: insecure high achievers. So these are high achievers, well, probably literally since birth, and they have been affirmed again and again. You're great. You're awesome. You're a genius. As I'm sure you are one yourself. And
Definitely not.
like, like
I have my fair share of failures, but thank you for the compliment. I'll have to temporarily reject that compliment, but yes.
it's a sincere one. It's a sincere one. And
Thank you.
and so hanging around with such high achievers, and Cambridge was different from, because I went to University of Malaya for my undergrad. That was an interesting experience where I learned critical thinking and such. However, it wasn't as international as I believe University of Chicago or Cambridge is. And that you put so many high achievers in one place, and you talk to them, and you learn things. And whether that be speaking to someone who has had a meandering path like mine, and who are mature students and who came back after 25 years into academia again, or it could be someone who has never worked a day in his or her life. So it opens up all these avenues for me to explore. I may not have a podcast like your good self. However, I have all these takeaways, and I saw in their body language all this fear, the same fears that you would expect from someone from a local university, from UNIMAS or UMS or Sunway College. It is quite universal. This uncertainty, this fear, being at a top tier university does not immunize one, or does not buffer one from external forces. It does not buffer one from fear for one's future. So a bit
Wonderful.
long-winded. Yeah.
Wonderful. And perhaps that's a universal aspect of the human experience.
Yes.
But this provides actually a wonderful jumping off point for a discussion, really, of your current role.
Yes.
As somebody who is deeply and in very many ways involved in the education of people, of course, you have been entrusted with the future, essentially, of an entire generation of Sarawakian students, essentially. And students, essentially, can come from all different sorts of backgrounds, as you rightly observe. There can be those who had succeeded for their entire lives, essentially. But at the same time, you also have the student, essentially, in the school that you had to get to by taking a boat. You have essentially the high and the low, the people right in the middle. And at the same time, right, somehow or another, you have to think really about, well, creating something that works for all of them. And so I guess when you've thought about, I guess, moving forward with education policy and essentially creating something for the entirety of Sarawak, So how have you approached that, and how does that work, I guess?
All right. Thank you for that question. And this question is definitely relevant because it is one of my core business. For your information, I am in charge, one of four people in charge of the implementation of both federal and state level policies with regards to the English language. So what that means is I implement, and I do not come up with the policies, although they do sometimes ask us for input, but basically we execute and
Mm,
we ensure and we supervise. I'm at state level, so that means I supervise the implementation at district level, and
mm,
there on to the schools and the students. To your question about Sarawak,
mm,
and from all these newspaper clips, you can already tell that Sarawak is heading in a direction that potentially in the next few years will pivot us away further and further away from what the federal Ministry of Education
mm,
has imagined for the country. But
mm,
not entirely though. We are not spiraling away from the main objective, which really is to have um, good outcome for with regards to student performance. And
mm,
what Sarawak has chosen to do, and I say this as someone whose paymasters are federal. My paymasters, for your information, is the MOE in Putrajaya. I
mm,
am merely working for the arm in Sarawak, which is representative of the federal government.
mm,
Uh, However, the state government, the state government's DLP or dual language program, which is termed Dual Language Program Sarawak or DLPS,
mm,
is uh, a whole category of its own
mm,
because of the usage of the English language. And why English? Because we have had a history. It is historical as much as it is um, looking at academics. It is looking at being pragmatic. Sarawak, as you know, became a partner with um, Peninsular Malaysia a bit later in the game, not in 1957, right? And therefore we were actually under the Brooke administration,
mm,
and and not even under the British rule proper. All right, until right until after the Second World War, and
mm,
and therefore there is a sense of there's a bit of a independence mindset, even away from uh, federally mandated policies and such. And so Sarawak has historically have fewer hang-ups socially and even intercommunal hang-ups that I believe the peninsula has. There
mm,
is, of course, ours is not a perfect state. However, we have leaders, and I'm proud to say state government leaders who would stand up for harmony above division in
mm,
this very important time. And so English is seen as essential as a pragmatic way to
mm.
not merely uplift, but to propel Sarawak onto the global stage, if not already. And for your information, I was surprised when I was in Cambridge at how highly regarded Sarawakian students are, whether that be undergrad or postgraduate. And
Mm,
I I'm not entirely sure why, but perhaps the facility with the language could
mm,
be one reason. And the facility of the language is not just limited to urban areas, but suburban and even rural areas too. Sarawak has had a history of missionaries going into rural areas as well as Peace Corps from America with their volunteering work, penetrating deep into the jungle and teaching in English for the
mm,
longest time. And now Sarawak has taken, I believe, a very courageous um, step forward, something that Sabah wishes to do, but they have not gathered the political will nor the moral courage to do. So Sarawak is basing itself on the MA 63, the Malaysian Agreement of 1963.
1963. Mm,
Yeah, specifically regarding autonomy for education. So Sarawak, for your information, has established an international school in Petrajaya, Kuching. It started in 2022, April of 2022. Uh, an international school called the Yayasan Sarawak International Secondary School, or SISS.
Mm.
I don't know if you're aware. So it will be the maths and science will be conducted entirely in English, in
Mm.
line with the dual language program Sarawak. So there will be 4 other schools, international schools. So and B40 students will be fully funded. They don't have to pay. So
Wow.
yes, and then followed by M40, they have to pay minimum 400 ringgit a term. There are 3 terms to a year, so 1,200 ringgit per annum. Whereas T20 students will have to pay around 1050 per term.
Mm.
So here the international school is not segregating people. They want people to mingle,
Mm.
and they're introducing IGCSE as the public examination for such schools. So there will be 5 schools. There is already one up and running in Kuching. You will have to sit for an exam in order to get in.
Mm.
Yeah, so one already established in 2022, and then there's another one in Semenggok, which would I think be up and running end of this year. There will be 3 more: one in Miri, one in Bintulu, and one in Cebu, where I come from.
Mm.
It's actually directly opposite my house in Cebu. And
Wow.
yeah,
You get to
so
oversee it, and then you can make sure that they are doing their job right.
well, I believe that's part of my department's job. So so I am very fortunate to um, be posted early on in my career to a rural school. A rural school, I don't know if you are aware, a rural school in Malaysia is divided into 3 tiers,
Mm.
right? Three levels, 3 tiers. There is Pedalaman 1 or P1, Pedalaman 2, and Pedalaman 3. With Pedalaman 3 being the deepest, most challenging, least accessible schools. I was in a P3. So I
Mm.
was there for 6 years, and there was where I picked up Bahasa Iban. There was where I picked up Bahasa Sarawak, and there was where I taught in predominantly Iban school, um, in a condition that was extremely challenging. It flooded like clockwork twice a year. It was uh, on a crocodile-infested river. I kid you not, and it, you can only imagine. It was only accessible by boat at the
Wow.
time. At the time, and there was no line. There was no telephone line.
Wow. Mm.
One would have to hang their phones in order to, you might get 1 bar, but only if you hang your phone somewhere on a tree somewhere. And
Wow. It's like the Viviana Mosibin situation, except like you actually experienced it.
I actually experienced it, and in Sarawak, no less. In Sarawak, no less. So um, that made me feel more than any other more Sarawakian. Yeah.
Mm.
So I was fortunate enough to have experienced that for 6 years, and now that I am in the office, I now appreciate what the rural teachers go through and what Sarawak has to do in order to uplift the whole state. So,
Mm.
so Sarawak is different from other states in that one, it has, I believe, good leaders and brave leaders who are visionaries, um, and two, the will, there's a sense of harmony between the communities that that is essential for this thing to happen. There is a
Mm.
pragmatism as well, um,
Mm.
to carry this off. And if I don't know, I think for the information of your audience, Sarawak is the only state that has its own Ministry of Education with its
Mm.
own Minister of Education at state level.
I
That is
see.
how seriously they take education. And um,
Mm.
above above and beyond that, they want something from Cambridge. So Cambridge English, Cambridge Assessment,
Mm.
and such. They have consultants flying in from Cambridge. They themselves went to Trinity College, Cambridge, as they have informed me,
Mm.
to to get consultation on how to get this off the ground. And
Wow.
but this is not new. From 2019 onwards, this policy of DLPS has been implemented and has been made official in a circular. The circular made the rounds in 2020. So that was the stamp of approval from the federal government as to the running of DLP Sarawak. We have their blessings. And circling back to Sarawak being looked at as this exemplar, I suppose. Not yet, but we are getting there. Yeah, I don't
Wow.
think we are quite the exemplar yet. So that is just to
I see.
yeah, it's too early to tell.
Well, you
But
can make it happen, and I'm sure that Minister Saga will be very happy to see that you're moving forward on that effort. Well, that's wonderful, and thank you so much for that sharing. Now, I want to touch on an interesting point that you mentioned earlier, right? Because like this is a very so like I actually like take part in a lot of like discussions on different education groups right here. And I'd like to offer an interesting alternate interpretation, right, of pragmatism, right, that has
right,
just been disconfirmed by you earlier. Okay, so you spoke earlier about well going off to essentially a P3 school, super
yeah,
rural, all the way in the middle of a crocodile infested river right there. Okay.
yeah,
So then oftentimes such schools they may be under resourced and they lack essentially funding essentially to have internet access and so on and so forth. Now, a common argument, right, and maybe this applies more to Peninsular Malaysia or something else right there, is that in fact the reason that we should teach in Malay is precisely because of pragmatism. So like you might think to yourself, okay, well, it's pragmatic to teach in English because like, well, the world economy is exposed to English. But a lot of people they say, well, we must teach in Malay because it is the first language essentially of the vast majority of people around essentially Malaysia at large. Of course, like maybe this can be attributable to well cultural differences or maybe like upbringing differences right across like the two states right there. But the argument goes it is essentially a kind of torture to essentially force students to learn essentially science and math in a tongue that is not their own or their first language right there. And the argument further goes that essentially because well the Malay speaking first language population is so much larger at the end of the day. Therefore, an education system that is to serve the majority of this country should essentially deliver basic knowledge in Malay and not in English. One of the many reasons why I found what you said to be tremendously fascinating. And so, how do you, I guess, square that circle when you think about pragmatism? So then, like, how do you understand that, and how does that, I guess, play in with what you've come to understand about well education for your students in Sarawak as well?
all right. Thank you for that question. That is again very thought provoking. This Malay versus English language as lingua franca or medium of instruction. This debate is not new. You can go all the way back to the PPSMI years, the teaching of English and maths in English in English in the mid 2000s, where a lot of money was invested in equipment, courseware, in courses, and English teachers were even rewarded. I don't know if you're aware, were even awarded money, cash money, 3,000 ringgits, 5,000 ringgits if they score highly on British Council set proficiency tests. So if they get, say, a C1, C2 being the highest native level.
Right,
Well,
according
of
to
course,
CFR, right? If I'm not
yes,
wrong.
yes, yes. I
Yeah.
mean, you being an English teacher yourself or have taught English, I mean, you're aware of that. So, teachers who actually achieved C1 were given 3,000 ringgit just like that, and C2 5,000 ringgit just like. Of course, that caused rift, that caused resentment. As in, why did the federal government focus so much on English. Yeah. However, in the ministry in Putrajaya, as well as the state government of Sarawak, has never dismissed Malay as the lingua franca or the glue for harmony of as the medium of both instruction and daily conversation
Mm.
for the country. It is essential that we learn Malay. It is vital as part of our as part of being a Malaysian. We have to be conversant or proficient in the language. Hence the term MBM, MBI, Mematabatkan Bahasa Melayu, and to strengthen as well English. So that's why they started off with Mematabatkan to dignify, you know. BM, it is simply not pushing aside BM versus BI. And so this debate has raged on and continues to rage on with no end in sight, with no solution in sight. And when and I was in my early career when PPSMI was implemented. The teaching of science and maths in English was implemented in full across the board by a former prime minister twice over, Mahathir. Yeah.
Okay.
and who actually did not consult too many people and steamroll his way. I mean, I understand that it came from a good place.
Mm-hmm.
As someone who has taught
Mm-hmm.
English in those years, to have my colleague teaching science in English was immensely helpful. No longer do I need to teach what evaporation means, what water cycle means, what tadpoles are, what frogs are, what knives are, what test tubes are. It is, I think this is something that's left out of the conversation. It is interdependent. When you have maths and science taught in English, it feeds into the language too. You know, it actually halves the effort for an English teacher. So no longer does the English teacher need to shoulder the entirety of the burden to educate our students in that language over 11 years, and for them not to still not be proficient, which is sad. But you see, I would never deny the importance of the Malay language, never. Um, and
Absolutely.
at the same time, how does pragmatism play into the teaching of maths and science English? Because if you all the public universities in Malaysia, save for the National University in Malaysia, which is UKM, uses bilingual. They are bilingual. The lectures are bilingual. Now, they are already pragmatic at the higher education level. For instance, if in BM, if science and maths are taught in Malay, in primary and secondary, they would, when they reach, say, when they have to do their undergrad in UITM, say, even UITM, engineering programs are conducted in English. Wouldn't it have been easier to transition from secondary school to college or university level like that? It simply expedites it. I mean, all this debate, it comes from, it is muddied and besmirched by so many sentiments, and one of which is nationalism, patriotism. It comes into that story. And however, the first time we did it at federal level, TPSMI, there wasn't enough time for us to see the outcome of an English language policy for science and maths. Of course, we have seen the reverse in Japan, in Italy, in the European countries, in Germany. However, those countries have extremely established language systems and extremely established history, right? Whereas Malay is still an evolving language. While we must learn it, we must know it. Uh, as a language of information, it is undeniable at this point in time. It is not Latin, it is English. So at least we have to give our students a leg up whether that be rural or suburban or urban. So it is pragmatism made manifest. And it takes moral courage to do this because no other state, not even our neighbor Sabah, dares do this. You can search for an article where the JPN director of Sabah actually just dismiss it offhand. We can't do this. Goodbye.
Wow.
Whereas we have Sarawakian state ministers speaking in unison, forming a united front with regards to the English language. If you go down to the ground in Sarawak, you will not find many people against the use of English language in our subjects. You compare that elsewhere, all right? You will not find that here. You can go down to the ground, and I've spoken to parents, I've spoken to people in rural areas. There is no denying. They did simply take it as something enriching, something positive, something good.
Wonderful.
And there is very little hang up. I won't say no hang up at all. I would say there is very little hang up with regards to using the language. You see the language being used in Adun, in Sarawakian Adun. We use both languages. Our ministers have proficiency, high proficiency in both Malay and English. Even at district or state level, we simply use the language with no hindrance. Our directors may not answer in English, but we are permitted to use it. We are encouraged to use it. There is no hindrance. And with one eye on the ball, and the ball really is ultimately student outcome. That is one way of expediting that has not been done or mandated at state or federal level. It has. I mean, at federal level, I understand. It's a juggle. If you have to know DLP in the peninsula, they allow for non-DLP classes. Whereas in Sarawak, it is not so. It has to be done fully. And it takes moral courage, and I commend Sarawakian leaders for doing that.
That is most wonderful. Now, I have an unexpected hero in this story right here. A controversial hero, so to speak, but nonetheless a hero. And to that end, I would like to show you a book. Are you familiar with this book?
Extremely so.
Extremely so. Have you read it, incidentally, by any chance?
I have.
You have? Oh, wow. Okay. It's interesting that Dr. Mahathir, the man who wrote this book right here and who observed essentially the idea of a dilemma, essentially, of Malay people, essentially would then proceed to, well, go forth. And of course, he's always been a strong fighter, essentially, for Malay identity. And as a Malaysian, of course, I affirm absolutely what you had said earlier. Kerana kawan-kawan kita yang berbangsa Melayu itu merupakan partner ataupun rakan seperjuangan dalam perjuangan bangsa dan negara Malaysia ini. And transitioning back to English then, if somebody who so ardently advocated for, well, the identity, the continued role of the Malays, and wrote essentially something like that, was willing to advocate for the English language and to push for it, it then makes you think to yourself, why is it then? My inference, and this is just purely me and nobody else right there, although it may be shared by some people, might be that the idea here is that just because you are learning things in English, it does not entail a threat to identity. At the very least, that's what I would think. What are your thoughts on that?
I am in full consensus. The Malay dilemma, let's talk about the book for a bit, is controversial on both sides of the aisle. The former PM, he minces no words, okay? And it is, I believe it came from good intention. He at the end of the day, he wants to uplift, and he continues to want to uplift his community, right? And he believes education is one way of doing that. I think he mentioned in the book when he went to the UK or to the US in his capacity as the Minister of Education at the time in the 70s. He found he found the students to be a politicking group, and he did not agree with that at all. At the same time, this is a man who has, who at the end of the day wants to uplift his community and by extension, the rest of Malaysia. So this is a man who is thinking already beyond simply uh, having nationalistic sentiments. Partly maybe, and this is just a hypothesis, he came not from a blue blood. He was not a blue. He is not a blue blood, unlike the Razaks of the world or the Tunkus of the world. Right? He's not a blue blood. His father was a teacher, a principal, and perhaps, and he himself had an English education, and he saw how that does not diminish one's identity. Far be it. We have our neighbors, and his once upon a time comrade in arms, Lee Kuan Yew, Lee Hsien Loong. They too went to Cambridge, and they came back even more patriotic than ever. Uh, the the language itself does not take away one's identity. I wish things can be. I wish things are as simple as that. That by taking on or using or adopting a language, one simply nullifies everything else that one grows up with. No matter how much of a British accent one adopts, or an American or Australian or Kiwi accent one adopts, one cannot deny the inherent Malaysianness. And I think that's what he was going for. That this using the language can only do good more than harm. And this is a man who, in his prime, I'm not talking about now, but in his prime, has always wanted to uplift his community and by extension the rest of the country, and by advocating for the teaching of English, the teaching of science and math in English, he foresaw how the knowledge economy, and now one that is driven by AI again, is driven by the Western Hemisphere, and the knowledge, that transference of knowledge, can only be expedited using this language. He knew it. He was courageous enough to push through all this wall of misplaced patriotism and misplaced nationalism to think for the people, or at least at his peak. I mean, I am not sure if I agree fully with the book. And I think with the best book, we have to be critical, right? Even with books that we like, we have to be critical. And this book can be, I suppose, we can dissect it in many, many ways. We can see it as him being overtly critical of his community, which has earned him flack from his own community, and which he has taken in stride, both in office and out of it, right? And right, but he too, as you pointed out, he too was English educated, and he too saw in the cave economy, which was during his administration. Cave economy came into prominence from the industrial economy, and in order for Malaysians to fully participate from K economy now into one that is driven by AI, by the IR 4.0, Industrial Revolution 4.0, he saw even 20 years ago how essential the language is. I mean, beyond coding, of course, that is another language that is very important. The language for us to expedite the transference of knowledge is simply English, and it has taken over from the language of learning of Latin, which used to be the language of learning. And one cannot deny it. One can pretend that, okay, English is not important. Perhaps one has that luxury if one language is extremely old, like Italian, right? Or which used to be the language of the Roman Empire, Italian and Latin, and all the Latin, or Greek. They have the luxury of saying, hey, we don't need the English language. Or if French of you are Japanese or you are Chinese, mainland Chinese. You have the luxury to say, no. But talking about the mainland Chinese, why do they then send so many of the students to the UK and the US if they have such hang-ups, right? They don't appear to have that hang-up. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we can debate, we can talk about this till the cows come
Yeah,
home. But this
that's
debate, the crux of what I'm saying really is, in brief, this debate is not new. Okay, and the very man who may seem the counterintuitive candidate, right, for this is actually proposing it. It's actually a proponent for this policy, which he actually pushed through with very little counsel, which actually came back to bite him and by extension the rest of us. And so, yeah, I think Sarawak has taken that ball and ran away with it.
you know, thank you so much for that impassioned sharing, Jarrod. Um, it's funny because here I'd like to draw in on what you said earlier. You said that it had come back to bite him. And here it is that, like we come back to this legacy. Now, obviously, the Malay Dilemma was written many, many years ago. And of course, like maybe you, like me, have had old Facebook posts that you look at with well, the expression of horror that comes along whenever you look at anything that you wrote when you were younger. Oh my gosh, did I really write that? Did I really think that? Or anything of that nature? So, with all respect to Tun, right, I wouldn't hold him to what he wrote all those years ago. But I do feel that in many ways it does show something significant. But let us assume for one quick moment that maybe such views essentially were perpetuated over the course of time, but then they became essentially, a matter of inconvenience. We see, of course, in this world, this country of ours, right? Well, that democracy, it has essentially an impact. We saw that essentially during the 2018 GE, and we saw it again in 2022, leading to Anwar Ibrahim becoming the prime minister in various ways. That was a celebrated event. But the thing that many people do not seem to completely want to take in is that sometimes democracy can not work in your favor. Sometimes, certain communities may say that, oh, you know what, like, we do not actually want, like English to be, the lingua franca right there. And there can be many reasons for that, right there. So then, when you think about that, then, I mean, some people might say that essentially the eventual reversal of the PPSMI was, in fact, democracy in action, the choice of the people essentially being made manifest. But as you kind of move forward, right? So we are in this interesting era where, Sarawak is being held up essentially as a model. Of course, you may like try to downplay it, or you may say, oh, like, it's not really a model just yet, right there. But you have essentially the ball in your hands, and you have the ability now to kind of like make a shot right there. An unprecedented one, born of moral courage and temerity, some critics might say, but essentially it represents in many ways, something new. As you consider everything that you know about this country and the sort of move forward right here, do you consider it likely, in a meaningful way, that we will arc towards the direction such that people will follow the lead of Mahathir back then and essentially echoed right now in the Sarawak Department of Education in moving this country towards an English medium education system to
I wouldn't know enough to comment about things politically or socially. And even as I make comments about the State Education Department, I am not representative right now. I mean, it's just throwing out disclaimers. Um, these are merely my own opinion. So I think people need success stories. Okay, and I'm really glad to be in an epoch in which I am in a state that was once quite downtrodden, and I think this is a sort of rags to riches or an underdog story that everyone wants to see win. You know, everyone wants to see Sarawak win in this or win in something. And
Mm.
for too long, I mean, even from the start of my career and before that, I think Sarawak is seen as the backwaters, and it continues to be seen as that only recently. And and I don't think the English first policy came from Mahathir, although Sarawak was in agreement with that. Sarawak was happy with that. We have never had any hang-ups, as I mentioned, or any issues with regard to the use of the English language uh, to teach or learn maths and science. And I think Sarawak, I can't, of course, speak for Sarawak. It is just my opinion. Uh, Based on my 16 years in the field, I think people are simply too tired of going around in circles. And and now that Sarawak has a bit of funding, which came from wresting back some of the petrol revenues,
Mm.
uh, uh, it is now pumped back into education and to uplifting the people.
Mm.
And the English language is simply one of many initiatives, the state government, which of course is not perfect, but it is at least trying its level best, and it at least has a united front in a country or a world that is full of noise. In a
Mm.
world full of noise that goes round and round without solution, which thrives on division, Sarawak, I am proud to say, simply wants to move on, simply wants development. And if for nothing else, it wants to move away from the divisive and polarizing politics of elsewhere, you know, not
Mm.
necessarily just in the peninsula or in Sabah or elsewhere, but we simply want to move on as people
Mm.
into the future, to propel ourselves into the future. English is simply one way of doing it. And again, I work for the federal government, and the federal government actually, without saying much, has been a proponent for the English language. I will have you know
Mm.
that the funding for English language programs has been unceasing from one minister to another. The baton has been given. If you notice, we have an educational blueprint, right?
We
We
do.
have an educational blueprint, and I'm very proud of that blueprint because not many countries have that. And
Mm.
if you see from Muhyiddin Yassin onwards to Mat Khalid to Razi Jidin to Mazli Malek to Razi Jidin and now to the current one, right? The
Mm.
baton is simply being passed. No one minister questions or blocks funding for the English language. We have massive funds for English language programs, which the public doesn't see.
Mm.
And they simply, the federal government or the Ministry of Education simply keep mum, keep a dignified silence while pumping money, thanks to the
Mm.
MOF,
Mm.
for English programs.
Mm.
And this is something that English teachers know. We are
Mm.
always thankful that we have money for English language programs, which we can't say for other subjects. You know,
Mm.
there is a focus. There is a focus on the English language from Mohideen Yassin's years, from 2013 onwards. You know, it's
Mm.
a 15-year plan, and we are coming out with a new framework soon. Um,
Mm.
so the federal government, whatever Sarawak is doing, the federal government has been doing on the sly. It's just that it's
Ah.
not mentioned. So with all this ruckus, with all these
Mm.
things going on, with all this seeming polarization, all these echo chambers of this versus that, this party versus that, the civil service has been humming along, you know. have been pumping money into English language programs. Get them to, I mean, this is not a secret. You know, the government, especially PADU, which is the um, arm of Pemandu for education, which oversees the KPIs for the ministry, the various civil service. They provide, they are very transparent about funding for education, for English language programs. If indeed the federal government is not in consensus with the English program, they wouldn't have given us the money. You know,
Wonderful.
so actually, the federal government has been keeping all these noises at bay. You know, things are humming along with regards to the English language. There has
Wow.
been no blockage at all. So
Wow.
what we see in the ministry is, you know, a lot of money. We have a lot of money with regards to the English language, and it has not stopped from 2013. It hasn't
Okay.
stopped. So all these fears are played out by the media, whether that be social media or mainstream, about English language is the baddie here, it's the wolf at the door, and you know, probably uh, but the Malay language, or the proponents of the Malay language, are having an existential crisis because of it. Well, the federal government obviously are not in agreement because they keep giving us the money. So
Right, absolutely,
yeah,
yeah. So, to everybody out there who thinks that Malaysia is going to become Singapore very soon.
I wouldn't say that, but
uh,
we but the government is very encouraging, from the MOF
Wonderful. Mm,
to the MOE
mhm,
and to the state, various states. I mean, the money, as I've said, no one
mm.
has stopped it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Prime Minister Anwar, Minister of Finance Anwar, Education Minister Fadlina Sidek, and so on and so forth. Now, I'd like to draw your attention. You mentioned Padu earlier, so here, well, perhaps you've seen this report. It's the World Bank report that was essentially released by so like Bending Bamboo Shoots. I'm not sure if you had seen this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
the Bending Bamboo Shoots report basically that was quoted by ex MITI Minister Rafida Aziz and
okay.
that incidentally mentions like your Padu sort of right here.
All
So
right.
then now I'm not sure if you saw that article featuring Rafida at the time, but like essentially she had essentially well, been very alarmist. She had been very much warning people that, oh, we must reform the education system now, because essentially Malaysia, you know, only learns the equivalent of like 8.9 years, you know, according to like this LACE metric, despite spending about 12.5 years in school. Of course, you know, like there is some validity to some of these criticisms right here. But I mean, credit is due where credit is due, I do believe. And that is something that I think that many people need to be a little more aware of at the moment. And so, Jared, well, in your current capacity, well, I guess as well assistant director essentially, and as an implementer really of these uh, programs essentially in Sarawak and at large, I guess. Well, what would you like to do with your with the money? I'm sorry, no, with the mandate, the grand mandate that you have, which is also, by the way, the money. But like, what would you like to do with it? And how would you like to kind of like shape Sarawak or Malaysia at large with the power that you have?
Right. So allow me to talk a little bit about Rafida Aziz's comments and the World Bank report. I have not read the World Bank report in full. I have seen more snippets here and there. Um,
Mm,
and I think as an economist, you appreciate that we have to look at methodology. Of course, the World Bank, I mean, I wouldn't say it's beyond reproach, but we do have to look at the methodology and how they came about with this data. Also, at the same time, we have to bear in mind that there has to be some validity to this, right?
mm,
And and if indeed it is true, and I believe mostly it is, it could be true, that our students are behind. Know that the Ministry of Education and the states and all these stakeholders are always doing their level best to empower and to educate Malaysians. And I have been in rooms with various people of various backgrounds, religious, denominational, racial backgrounds, community backgrounds, teachers, education officers work through the night to, complete tasks, to implement policy and all of that. And so when it comes to education, people are in consensus. People just want to educate. And I have not been in a room where people say, let's educate this community more or that community more. The language used in Putrajaya is the same language, similar language used in Sarawak and elsewhere, which is how do we better empower, how do we provide more access to our students, regardless of background, especially those from D40 backgrounds and all of that. I think if it's a World Bank report, it is good that the former Minister Raifida Aziz highlighted this, and I'm sure she wasn't the only one who highlighted this. And to talk about the education system, overhauling it, is to miss the point that we had an educational blueprint that was supposed to last about 15 years, like 2013, and it's due for a new one. And let's look at the methodology of this educational blueprint. There is, of course, no perfect one, right? How did this educational blueprint came about? It came from town halls. It came from, if you look at the blueprint, I mean, almost every teacher has one, but many don't read it, or probably collecting dust somewhere underneath the desk. Anyway, if you look at how they did it, they conducted town halls. They asked teachers, they asked even bosses from the private sectors, as many stakeholders as they could to get input. All right. Of course, I think a management consulting company was spearheading this, but local universities were involved. They did their level best, all right, to have all these various viewpoints. And if you read the educational blueprint, it is printed out in very articulate, very eloquent language, and being very vulnerable in terms of the lack. It's not saying, we are amazing, we're just amazing. It did not say that at all. There were so many reports from the school inspectorate saying, okay, there's a gap, there's a massive gap between how the teachers perceive their own competence and how the school inspectors view them. There's a massive gap there, and it's outlined in graphs. It's outlined in very clear language. All right, and it is them admitting that there is a lack, and how do we do it? And it's done in phases, in 3 phases. So it is clear. It's quite quantitative.
Wow.
And yeah, if you look at the whole thing, there are provisions and there are considerations for almost all the stakeholders, from the students to the leadership. How do we train leadership who will be in their position not only for 3 years? A director who ascends to that particular position is usually has 3 years left. How does he or she implement anything, right? So they are talking about grooming, they're talking about empowerment, they're talking about distributed leadership, and all these terms, which would not be out of place in a World Bank or a UNESCO document. And it is a framework. It has very clear guidelines. Of course, the implementation and a plan are 2 very different things, right? They're 2 very different things. And Ofsted, which was the Office for the Standard of Education from the UK, no less, came over to audit us, all right? Headed by Sir Jim Rose, who was the chief of school inspectors in the UK, right? Knighted, no less. And he came over and he agreed. He agreed with the education blueprint, but he did sound a warning. He did say the implementation matters, the supervision matters. And I think in many ways, the operationalization of this blueprint is it needs to be improved. But my point really is, in this long-winded way, is that people are doing their level best. People are doing their best with the
Mm.
best the data they have at the time. It is not like before. With this blueprint, you have various ministers, all right, basically saying, just go on, carry on. I'm not going to do anything new. Very different, even from the UK. You have a new Secretary of Education, and he or she will just overhaul. The term overhaul is tempting. The term overhauling anything, a system, is sexy for someone not in the system, right? It is very
Mm.
easy for
I
a
see.
former minister. It is very easy for someone in public, or even in kopitiam, even parents or people who are not behind the wheel,
Mm.
to simply say, let's overhaul. In what way? In what way?
Mm.
Now that people cannot answer, right? And of course, she based her comment on the World Bank um, report, which is
Mhm.
fair, which is valid.
May
Yeah,
I interrupt you?
yeah. Go on.
I'm very happy that you have said what you said earlier, because the World Bank is in complete agreement with you. The World Bank identifies the Malaysian Education Blueprint basically as desirable. It says that it is awesome, and it basically just echoed essentially what you had said, that essentially implementation is tremendously important. Wow, I'm glad to have had that validated by somebody who studied education at Cape. Wow, wonderful, amazing. And so yeah, like that's actually great. I mean, like truly wonderful. But yeah, like as you kind of move forward, then, well, when you think about like the story of implementation, right, and like the various things that you'd like to continue to do, I guess, like in the days ahead, well, what have you found most effective so far in your experience of implementation, and what are some things that you like to do in the future?
So the move forward is is not new. I think partly thanks to this blueprint, there has been an emphasis on data-driven solutions. So even at ministry level, at state level, things cannot move forward unless we have data. As a trained economist, I think you can appreciate that. As icky as people find numbers and figures, uh, it is essential that we at least base it on something, right? Beyond percentages, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and I will have you know that data collection is always ongoing in the ministry, and even in meetings, large and small, people will always challenge certain things. No longer, we have Malaysia, I am happy to report, have moved beyond the days, have moved past the days where people can simply say things because they have the authority to say such things. Now they have to back it up. They simply have to back it up. And you see this in the current crop of ministers, like Fasina Siddiq, or even our former minister, Khairi Jamaluddin. He will not go on record on saying things or claiming things without it being justified. We are in that era now. So being data driven is extremely important. And of course, for any macro policy, right, there will be critics, and it is welcome. Discourse, dialogue is welcome. So if we look back at the methodology for the educational blueprint, we have already asked so many people. I mean, the people who implemented it or who came up with the blueprint have already done their level best, all right, to have as many opinions as possible, all right, and to put them in themes, to code them, and then to have this discussed in using various qualitative or even mixed methods. And yet there are still criticism. So that just shows, it's just basically testimony or testament to how very little knowledge is a dangerous thing. For people who do not appreciate what the educational blueprint is or what it represents, it is entirely easy to just go about imagining civil servants as headless chickens and trying their level best not to sink the ship, right? I understand where that came from. Even within the ministry, we try not to project that kind of image, but I know that is very much entrenched because the ministry, state or federal, is actually a monolith that is very insular, you know. But that is also true for the UK, right? It is not transparent, or it keeps a dignified silence, which in the world of social media is probably not the best. They probably should hire a publicity agent or something. Yeah, they're not doing themselves any favors when I saw some of the pot shots taken by ignoramuses, whether online or on mainstream media. And the ministry keeps a dignified silence. I just kept thinking, why didn't you guys say something? Just to clarify, just to clear the air. It would have been good, you know, to just be transparent.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so yeah, data driven.
Wonderful. Okay. And so, as we kind of move closer towards the end of this interview, then my question for you then is, what are some successes that you consider particularly noteworthy, and what also are some failures that you think that you would like to improve upon in the days ahead?
I'll start with failures. I think I wouldn't call them failures, but I call them I would call them challenges, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one challenge is educating the public about the many things the ministry has done, or or indeed, as I mentioned earlier, providing better PR for the ministry.
Mm.
Again, I have to really point out that when it comes to education, um, I have yet to see a meeting room of various denominations and backgrounds
Mm-hmm.
saying we should do more for this group, uh, majority or whatever group over others. I have yet to attend a meeting like that. It's usually, okay, which community is underserved? Which community needs help? Which community can we speak up for? I think, okay, to answer your question in brief, uh, failure to provide better PR for what has been done, which is no small thing. And I'm sure you can appreciate, or you already know, that this government is not this government, but this country, all right, of various governments of the day, provide 16% of the country's revenue to education, which is one of the biggest in the world. Japan does not provide 16%, nor does Hong Kong, nor not even Singapore provide 16% of its revenue for education alone. And yeah, 16%, that is no small deal. So so I think better PR is needed for what is done. Of course, not self-aggrandizing ones, not ones that just points out, we're amazing, look at us. Nah, not those things, but at least things that people care about, that one subgroup may not care about. For example, urban people may not care about whether a school falls into the river in the rural area, right? But the students in that particular school knows about it and cares about it. So better PR. And I think not a lot of effort is done by the ministry, both at state and federal government, at state level, with regards to pointing this out. They maintain this dignified silence, which I think is honorable, but it's losing the battle for support. I think. Okay, that's one failure, one massive failure. How many times? I mean, how many times do you see our current Minister of Education not being defensive? So, um, yeah, so that's one. So successes, I don't need to point out too many, but I'm quite proud of what we are trying to do for preschool teachers.
Mm.
Currently, we try to um, we try to uplift or motivate preschool teachers who may be sidelined, I'll have you know, even in primary schools, right? Because they are in their own building, and not many people know what preschool teachers are up to, but they're essentially the boss of their own realm. So they teach everything. Like you have taught before, so you know teachers in public or private schools don't teach all the time. You have a timetable, right? A preschool teacher on that timetable is just her or him. So um, I think we can be proud that at least at state level and at federal level, there are efforts to motivate them. There are efforts to include them. There are efforts to, you know, to essentially empower them to think beyond their current challenges and to pursue, or at the very least, pursue higher education in their chosen discipline. Yeah, so that is one success. But if I have to touch on others, it will sound too self-aggrandizing. Look at how awesome we are. No, I'm not going to do that. I mean,
well, perhaps then I can flip the script slightly then. If you were to imagine a child that has never spoken English before, maybe has not learned it at home or otherwise, if you were to either personally, well, help this child go from where they are to a point of being able to utilize the English language as a language of knowledge acquisition, a language of professional work, and otherwise, if you were to do that either personally or if you were to inspire people to do that right there, so then, like, what in your view would be the most direct pathway towards doing that?
that is um, that is a question many committed English teachers uh, try to answer, either by action or um, through the veil of philosophy. And I would tell you this: it starts from appreciation of the language, and it starts from loving the language. That is why I am utterly against any public exam, save for perhaps SPM and TPM. When it comes to the language, there has to be a love. A love, if not for mythology, then local mythology. A love for the sound, for the cadence, for the rhythm of poetry. Simply using the word, and it starts from there. And there is a push from both federal and state government for fun learning, and that is actually the right direction. So it starts from liking, loving the language, and not doing it in a tiger mom or dad way, as in, oh, you are drilled this, and then you like it once you are better at it, which is essentially the tiger mom slash dad parent ideal or philosophy. It has to start from loving the language and seeing how the language can be used beyond scoring. All right, beyond scoring in papers and beyond getting all these brownie points, etc. I will give you an example. I have a friend who is still an English teacher teaching Form 5. He was teaching a class which was not interested in the language, not interested in anything. So he struggled to teach them, and then they sat for the SPM. They didn't do well. A year later, he met 5 of these students, all boys, and now they were quite proficient in the language, albeit still broken. So he was startled. So he asked them, "What happened when you were in my class? You could barely string a sentence together. So what transpired between then and now?" And they simply said, "We became salesmen." I think English teachers, and as well as other subject teachers, here's the thing that I noticed. We teach the mechanics without showing them why it's for. It's like, okay, it's like the way we are teaching now, right? It's like teaching the strokes for a painting without showing, oh, here is Mona Lisa, right? This is what you should aspire for, right? We don't teach that. We just teach, okay, all right, so you should, your subject verb should agree, and all these things, this is an adjective, and you should go this way, the tenses. No, we are showing the strokes, the minute strokes. And of course, it gets tedious. It's like playing, I see that you have instruments. It's like being drill arpeggios day in, day out, day in, day out, right? And and you don't see the
That'll be
point, like,
torture.
why? Yeah, right. You just keep doing it, and you don't see the point. You cry. You're playing on. I mean, you're playing your double bass, and you're crying. Why do I need to do this? And without seeing Yo-Yo Ma in action, right? Without listening, I mean, of course, probably have heard of Bach and all that. I mean, for younger students, they have heard Bach and all that, but not relating it. I think just imbuing, inculcating, nurturing a love for the language, or showing them how this can be used. Or I recently was involved in an exchange program between an Osaka school, a school in Osaka, and a school in Kuching, two schools in
Mm.
Kuching. And our students are heads and shoulders above the Japanese in terms of the proficiency. I'm proud to report. All right.
Wow.
And these are not the top students. These are not the top flight students. These are not the high performers. These are regular students with average results. And they outperform the Japanese students. And all right, so what was my point? My point really is there has to be taught love. The teacher has to show the love for the language. The teacher should be like the fictional teachers of Hogwarts. You know what I mean? You see,
You have to be careful with that. Later, they'll all become like Snape.
hey, yeah, Snape turned out alright in the end, right?
Well replied.
Right.
All right.
All right. So right. Okay. So if let's pull in fictional teachers, right? So if you look at Hogwarts teachers, they not only taught, they practice, right? So I believe English teachers should not only teach, but they should be out in the real world or doing things related to the English language, whether that be writing, whether that be blogging, or like YouTubing, right? Or interviewing people in the language. They should be out there becoming practitioners. This is for teachers. And in becoming practitioners, they become quite inevitably and quite invariably role models for their students. Students, I mean, they can of course learn from YouTube, but nothing beats hearing that from someone close to them, someone in their classroom, day in and day out, using the language, appreciating the language.
Mm.
And students, as you can appreciate as a teacher yourself, they are not dumb. They look at you and they know if you find this a drudgery, right? If you find this, okay, I don't want to teach you, and they see you rolling your eyes or whatever, they can pick up on that as in, this sucks, right? But if a teacher shows a love for the language beyond, the mechanics, okay, how can you score? How can you score in SPM, which is all right, which need to be taught but not emphasized. You know what I mean? There need to be a love for the subject regardless of the subject. You can do that for Malay, you can do that for physics and chemistry, right? Yeah. And teachers, quite unfortunately, don't read anymore, right? Every teacher should have a Goodreads account. It's
Good reads, huh?
yeah, we should. I think English teachers should be quite agnostic when it comes to reading. So what if we read trashy novels? So what if someone reads Cecilia Ahern? So what if they read Jeffrey Archer? Or, there should be no judgment. Just read, lit, chick lit, read stuff. Read even all this, what's that? Graphic novels. I love graphic novels. Read something for Neil Gaiman. Read something for Neil Gaiman. You have pictures. And you have philosophy wrapped inside, in between those pages. It's amazing. Read Neil Gaiman. Read the whole Sandman series. So one should be agnostic and omnivorous when it comes to reading. Teachers should read. Teachers should practice.
May I show you something? It's funny that you mentioned Goodreads, but there was a Star article about me a few years ago.
Right.
I'm not sure if you saw this, but yeah, I took up the Goodreads reading challenge a few years
Ooh,
ago. Um, I read in that year 400 books in
amazing. Congratulations.
it was pretty insane. But I recall actually spending 15,000 ringgit on books alone during that year. It was a very interesting year, but like yeah, I very much identify that sentiment, that idea of wanting
Amazing.
to like just continually learn and do things of that nature right there. And so thank you for that advice. I absolutely agree. If anybody out there wants to well learn the English language, then yeah, like reading, finding things that they really enjoy is really like a gateway towards being able to do that. Um and well, also in respect to your time as well, I would like to essentially ask one last question then. What guidance or advice would you have for the future implementers, so to speak, of our education system in the days ahead? And this can be quite general, well, either to teachers, to education, well, department directors, or to say ministers in the future ahead.
Thank you for that question. Um, if I have to give one advice to future executors of policy, I would say just bear in mind that there are many pathways for achievement, that towards success. There are many definitions, and we have to embrace that definition. That we must not simply pursue. Of course, in the beginning, we pursue linear meritocracy, as in we look at achievement. Okay, undergrad and then degree, and before that, all right, SPM, STPM, undergrad, masters, PhD, and all this linear stuff. There are people whose opinions we can value, who may not have a degree, you know, and we must not vilify or demonize book smarts or street smarts. We have to, and we also must not uh, put into conflict people who are just starting in their career, whether in teaching or as a student, or and someone who already has crystallized knowledge from years of experience. So because okay, let's talk about the young and the experience. The young has fluid intelligence, right? You probably have heard of this term. Fluid intelligence, as in there's more of a gung ho spirit to do and try things, right? And there is a less of a fear of failure because they're just beginning. They want to prove themselves, right? And what we see in schools or in higher education or in these realms is there is sometimes little value placed on the opinions of the young, right?
Mm,
People who are just beginning, right? And also, the young must not demonize the experience of people who are more veteran. These are known as crystallized intelligence. They may not have degrees. Many probably have diplomas in education, right? They probably did not have, don't even have university degrees, but simply came from teacher training colleges, which only confer them diplomas. But they know the many potholes in implementation, right? These come from experience. So the synergy of these two, fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence, will can only enrich our experience. So my advice here is we embrace this diversity of backgrounds. We don't just listen to people who put on this lab coat of authority, right? Okay, I am the director. I am the director general. I am the minister, and therefore my word is law. Or someone with a PhD even. Be critical, have critical thinking, but do not criticize uh, based on nothing. You know, it is too
mm,
easy to criticize, and we hear this in coffee shops. You know, let's overhaul, which is a very sexy word to use, I would say, and a very populist way of doing things or saying things. So I embrace that diversity of ideas, embrace that people who fail, all right, along the way may have something valuable to say, as
mm,
you have indeed manifested today, talking to me who have failed many times. And Um,
I do, in many ways as well. Mm.
all right. So I think you do appreciate that there is more value for people who have failed and bounced back. The value is in coming back. All right. The value is in coming back and getting back on the horse despite the failures. Because what I saw in University of Malaya, what I saw in Cambridge, is there is this prevalence of, I don't know if it is so in Chicago, this prevalence of fixed mindset, as in you have to do it perfectly or you don't do it at all. That is
Mm.
extremely dangerous. The,
Mm.
the, the lesson that implementers and teachers and anyone in this field can pass on to whoever is implementing is embrace failure and value bouncing back. All right. Because if we put too much weight on doing things perfectly, right, people
Mm.
will just shut down. People will just say, okay, I've always been known as this bright kid, and now I can't seem to do well in this subject, and therefore I will not pursue this because I will not get all the praise and all that. That is just fixed mindset. And
Mm.
and so we have to embrace this diversity of background, no matter how it is rich. We have to look at the many ways people can contribute towards uplifting this field of education beyond
Mm.
academics alone.
And that is a wonderful note right here to our continued growth, to the expansion of new horizons, the integration of all past histories, lessons, eras, and developments to move forward, to chart bravely a new path into the future. Ladies and gentlemen, Jarrod Sio, Pathways. It has been an absolute honor, and thank you so much for having this conversation with me.
Thank you very much for having me, Victor. Thank you.